Hi, it's Ajanette, and I am here to wrap up your lecture on emotions for psychobiology. So we ended going into psychoneuroimmunology. If you break down the word, it's looking at psychological, neurological, and immunological research. So it's really a field of study where we look at the intersection of psychology, neurology, and our immune system. So how does psychology, neurology, and the immune system work together to affect our health and well-being? And typically that involves studying stress and the implications to our psychological and physical health. So we're looking at the effect of stress on the immune system, what processes are disrupted as a result of stress, and so on and so forth. So as we've discussed earlier, we know that stress activates two responses, one of which activates the immune system. And so through natural killer cells, leukocytes, and cytokines, our immune system is active. And sadly, in chronic long-term stress situations, it can be overactive to the extent that it actually makes us more vulnerable to illness. And so that prolonged stress response can actually trigger symptoms that are very similar to depression, in that we become very unmotivated, we can have a depressed mood, a lack of energy or interest, and it also can contribute to long-term toxins in our hippocampus that can actually harm and damage our hippocampus, which will affect memory and just overall. Okay, there we go. Anyway, so when we look at negative effects on our hippocampus, sadly we have a lot of corticoid receptors in our hippocampus, and so that could be why stress has a negative impact on our hippocampus, because it releases additional corticoids during chronic stress situations, which then can kind of overstimulate those receptors in the hippocampus and damage them. So sadly, we don't have the same kind of neurogenesis, or we don't create new neurons or synaptic connections in the hippocampus, which in long term can impair our memory tasks. And so typically it will impact our cognitive and behavioral functioning. So stress, when we're exposed to stress at young ages, it can also kind of predispose us toward negative outcomes later on. So it does negatively impact our long-term development. Children who are exposed to chronic stress in their childhood actually have brain abnormalities, and their endocrine system doesn't function consistent with that of control groups. And we talk about this diathesis stress model between psychological disorders and stress, in that stress kind of activates certain psychological disorders, and childhood stress certainly does make us more vulnerable to developing a psychological disorder later in life. So additionally, it can kind of negatively train our stress response, and so our stress response becomes more intense than it would have otherwise been, and we can become a little bit more vulnerable to developing anxiety and other stress disorders. And then, as I mentioned, it can impact neurological development and our endocrine system as well. So, and this is both childhood stress and prenatal stress. So even during pregnancy, high rates of stress during pregnancy can impact our long-term health and well-being. And we've seen this both in animals and in correlational studies with humans. Psychosomatic disorders are psychological disorders. If you look at it, psychological, and soma means body. So there's psychological disorders that produce physical symptoms within the body. The most common example is ulcers, but heart disease, asthma, we can be more vulnerable to colds and flus. Even cancer can develop in the body as a result of stress. But again, the most common psychosomatic disorder, where there's no physical cause or explanation for the disorder, it's purely generated through psychological reasons, is ulcers. And ulcers has been shown to increase a bacteria, which then makes you, or excuse me, stress increases the Helicobacter pylori bacteria that makes you more vulnerable to ulcers. So it's kind of an indirect effect. Headaches, migraines, things of that nature, also psychosomatic because we can get stress headaches. So in terms of genes, we do have certain genes that might make us more vulnerable or resilient. So resilience is just this strength to endure high levels of stress and still have positive outcomes in spite of the stress. But then there's other things, presuming we're not built with those genetic resiliency factors, we can do things to control our stress response. We can implement breathing practices, deep breathing. Exercise is not only the fountain of youth, but it's a great stress management technique. Meditation, where you're focusing on a single stimuli, either visual or physical, to kind of relax your mind and give your mind a break from worrying about the future or the past. Mentally distracting yourself by engaging in a hobby or something that's going to draw your attention and allow you to get into that flow can be a wonderful coping mechanism. And then certainly having kind of a problem-based coping mechanism where we're addressing the issue and we're trying to implement resolutions and implementing more of like a growth mindset where we're taking action to fix the problem. All of those things can be wonderful coping mechanisms. And then, of course, social support is critical at helping you deal with stress. And it's positive for that prefrontal cortex area as well, because it does help you problem solve, and it just kind of can bring some clarity so that you can come up with appropriate solutions. So, okay. Some other, what else did I do? Visualization is a really good technique where we can take a mini vacation 365 days a year, anytime we want around the world. And visualization does allow us to, again, just give our mind that little mental break. When we talk about mindfulness, we're talking about being in the moment, and we're talking about sometimes when I'm really stressed, I dread and I worry about things that I can't control. And so I might be dreading the future, or I might be dwelling on the past and kind of beating myself up over something stupid I did or said. And I really am not enjoying the present. And I was going through this with this whole custody and separation issue, where I'm so busy dreading the outcome of, am I going to lose my kids, that I'm not really enjoying my time right now with the kids. And so mindfulness teaches you to kind of be in the present. And you have to consciously choose to be mindful. You have to have a kind of a center and a purpose in everything that you do. And, distracting thoughts come in, and you have to consciously reassess your focus. And, I'll actually there's a great, I'm going to just tell you my video, but there's a great video on YouTube called Fuck That Meditation. Meditation and mindfulness are related in that when you are meditating, you're kind of practicing mindfulness. And as thoughts come in, you're just acknowledging them, but letting them go. Anyway, look up that meditation. It's a really cool meditation. It's funny and humorous, but at the same time, it's kind of just real, and I really appreciate that. So, also cognitive restructuring, where instead of being catastrophic in your thinking, you can reframe how you're thinking about things and how you're perceiving things to be much more empowering and positive. And that's similar to a growth versus a fixed mindset, in that people with a growth mindset are more likely to engage in cognitive restructuring. Fixed mindset's more limited. They just kind of think whatever happens, happens, and they don't have an internal locus of control. So they feel like outside circumstances kind of determine their fate, or maybe I just wasn't born good at math, and so I'm kind of limited in my ability to overcome this stress. But in a growth mindset, I have very much an internal locus of control, and I recognize that I can grow and acquire skills and adapt and use coping mechanisms that will make me better at handling a circumstances or overcoming a challenge and a barrier. And sometimes that challenge might be my own way of thinking that I need to overcome and restructure. Positive affirmations are, when I'm really affirming something healthy and positive within myself. So it's believing in yourself. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can mentality. And it's really important because sometimes I think we're really critical of ourselves and we beat ourselves down. And positive affirmations are really building yourselves up. And I tell my students in personal growth all the time, it's okay to lie to yourself in the beginning. So sometimes when we're with someone that drags us down, they start to lie to us and they tell us we're not worthy or we're not pretty or we're not smart. And initially we're like, whoa. But then over time they keep telling us those things, and they might be total lies, right? But we start to believe them. And so you can apply the opposite strategy to yourself. If you don't believe that you have these strengths and this beauty and this intellect and this potential, then just lie to yourself in the beginning and tell yourself you do. And if you lie to yourself often enough, eventually you'll believe it. If we can learn how to believe the bad lies, we can learn how to believe the good lies too. And then again, social support and hobbies, because they're wonderful distractions. And so overall, that's it for emotion. I hope that you've taken some positive things away from the chapter. And then, and some of the added things that I brought in that weren't part of your book, but certainly add value to you individually. So, okay, have a good one. Bye.